Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk podcast, where we discuss the convergence of technology, business productivity, and collaboration culture. My guest today is Micah Remley. Hello.
Hello.
CEO at Robin, the leading workplace management platform that is redefining hybrid work. So welcome.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you. And it's a great topic. We're talking Workplace 2.0, reinventing the office for the hybrid era. So I'd love to learn more about your background and what your company does, and then we'll just jump right into it. So give us the longer version of who you are and what you guys do.
Well, thanks, Christian. And it's fantastic to be here today. So I think it's a very relevant topic for listeners out there. So I'm the CEO of Robin. We are a workplace management software solution, really helping people implement hybrid work strategies at their workplaces. We have about 10,000 workplaces around the globe that we help manage their office strategies, their office technology stack to make it easier for employees to use the office. So because of that purview, both companies, very large, very small, we have this really unique perspective into what's really going on underneath the covers of this really big office debate, this hybrid work, in office, remote work debate, really interesting perspective on the real trends that are going on there. So looking forward to shedding some light on an oft talked about topic kind of across the press and in conference rooms everywhere.
Well, this is it. What's interesting too. My first thought goes back to my first experience working for a very large company. I worked for Pacific Bell, and for those that remember back and have telecom backgrounds, Pacific Bell in San Ramon, California, out in the East Bay. Two towns over from where I grew up, and going to that massive building and being somebody who at the time, like it was the early to mid '90s. Tough housing market, trying to sell my house up in the Sacramento area took over a year.
Mm-hmm.
I had a dedicated cubicle and space there, but a couple times, as you do in the large companies, they kind of reorg things and move things around. So a couple times, I found myself without a space,
Yep.
and they started an area in the building, or several areas, called hoteling spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this was in the mid '90s. Laptops and things were still not as common. We all had desktops there. And so this was a space where I could literally go in, log in, at least get into my email and basic functions in a terminal type environment. Had a shared printer, but I had a space. I could plunk my stuff down for the day. Couldn't leave anything behind. It had to be empty at night, but I could kind of claim a space and work remotely. And they were experimenting with that idea. And I think they had some problems because a couple of the engineers that were using the space would then not go home because there was a gym in the building, and security would come in and find them sleeping on the couches in the lobbies while it was locked out in the morning. So that part didn't work out of the hybrid.
Right.
But but so this is an idea of, it's been around for a long time of how do we do this and reduce kind of the cost of overhead. What was the kind of the impetus behind this? Like, how did you find yourself in this space? What was the kind of thinking of the company as you built it?
Yeah, what we really saw were the problems that we're developing when it comes to office space. So you have this problem. It's really this capacity issue, and hybrid work just really hammers it home even more. So it's sort of the peak versus valleys. What you see is on the busiest days now, and this was true before the pandemic, because we've been around for over 10 years now as an organization. So even before the pandemic, you had this idea around constraints in the workplace. So in your old telecom days, that was around desks, but even before the pandemic, that was around conference room space. And that really the whole point, the name of your podcast, obviously, is around collaboration, and that should be the point of the office. And what we've moved is from the pandemic, before the pandemic, to now, which is really that is the point of the office. We're getting people together and collaborate. We can do work at home. We can do heads down work. We can do a whole bunch of work at home. but really that getting together with other employees, your coworkers at the office is the important point. So where are the constraints that exist there? And what we saw was there wasn't enough conference room space. And adding more conference room space is really expensive. And then what you saw is these peaks and valleys is that between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., they're really busy, but they're not busy the rest. And they're filled with ghost meetings of people that reserve one, but then never actually use it anymore. So what we found was by putting some algorithms around conference room space, we could all of a sudden free up about 40% of it. And that said, hey, we're on to something here. There's a lot of efficiencies to be gained by really thinking about matching how people use the office with the technology that's managing it. And then that was how the company took off. And that's still very much what we're doing today is how do you drive the benefits, the collaboration benefits, while making sure that your footprint is right sized and you get the most out of the space that you have.
What I love is the culture of when you have a meeting in a room that's scheduled and the previous people are still in there and don't look like they're wrapping it up when they should be because they're now overlapping in your space. Like the culture of, how much can you do? Like knock on the door. Do you step in and say, hey, you guys are done. You need to get out now. Or I would take the passive aggressive, which was like a bunch of us for the meeting. We just go like file into the room and then stand there staring at the person
Right.
talking, like just culturally, that's a
Well, digital signage helps with that a lot. So one
yep,
of the things that we enable is signage outside of the conference rooms where then you can see it's red, yellow, green. All right, now it's my room, not yours anymore. And that
yeah.
helps to be a very firm reminder of you've booked this for an hour, other people are waiting. It's a constrained resource. You need to give it up, or if you don't, it's got to be for a really, really should be a really big client call then if you're not giving
Yeah.
it up.
No, I mean, as you look at the way that your clients are working, again, pandemic, we all moved into remote, and a lot of organizations that, didn't think that they could offer a remote or hybrid environment suddenly realized, hey, the technology's in a place where we really can do it. The internet needs to stay on, but besides that, we can do this.
Right.
What do you when as that wrapped up in a lot of organizations, and there's many of them out there that say like you must be in person at the office
Yeah.
and they're removing a lot of that flexibility.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's a mistake. There's a lot of, and I'm like, my career has been largely in roles where most of my interactions are not with people in the office.
Right.
It's on the phone and outside.
Yeah.
I remember driving, growing up in the Bay Area and working for years there. We're driving out from the East Bay to the peninsula on phone calls in the morning and at night. Would have a lot of calls, and I'm driving the office to sit there where my clients were in Europe and
Yeah.
in Asia,
Yeah.
and not many of them in the U.S. And so my calls were in the morning and the evening, and I was filling space in between there in the office. Like, why am I driving all this when I could do this remotely?
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of other reasons for moving back and together, and not everybody is good at being productive when they're working remotely. But what do you see that's happening in the companies that you're seeing? Are they? I mean, are they trying to move, like, remain in a hybrid? Is it more of a transitional step? Like, what's kind of the movement that you see in industry?
We're definitely in a transitional step right now. There's no doubt about it. So first of all, if we look at CEO surveys, so CEO's survey, I think it was KPMG did it last year. One of the big consulting firms. I'm sure I'm screwing up which one, but they looked at it last year. And in June of last year, about 40% of CEOs said that we're going to be back in the office 5 days a week. And by September, it was up to over 80% of
Wow.
CEOs said we're going to be in the office 5 days a week. So we have to look like, why is that? If you talk to employees, employees think deeply that work from home is the way of the future, especially knowledge workers, whereas CEOs are clearly going another way. And the reasons why they're thinking the other way are a few things. Is that first is it's really hard to build culture when you're in a remote setting. It's just the differentiation. Like your employees all become a bunch of free agents
Right.
basically, and so it's very hard to have that cohesion that really links them all together in a completely remote setting. So that's
Especially if you're brand new, if you're being onboarded, like I get that. I mean,
yeah,
my last company I joined, like I had known them all for years, worked with them, was a consultant before joining, and so I knew everybody. But I mean, I couldn't, people that were being hired during the pandemic and having never met anybody face to face. That's a massive difference.
really Really challenging thing. So that's the first reason, right?
Yeah.
So the second reason is that from a productivity standpoint, it's really easy to point and say, "Hey, like I'm really productive and everything." But the fact of the matter is, I'd use the analogy of going to the gym. Some people can work out at home and they do a really good job of working out at home, and they can stay disciplined, they can stay motivated. But most people actually work on the treadmill harder when they're standing next to somebody else working on the treadmill. So even if you're on calls to Europe and everything all day long, there actually is a discipline and motivation from being around other people. And actually, workplace surveys tie this out. So, do you know what performance boost you get by sitting next to another high performer? 30%. So you
Wow.
get a very significant performance boost, but just by sitting within, I forget, it's like 20-foot radius of another high performer. And that's because it's infectious. You see them working harder. So it's two things. You see them working harder, and also you hear how they're doing things, and then you start adopting those strategies. So there's a really deep performance benefit to sitting near somebody. And the final is the collaboration piece, right? Is that we often think of innovation as being linear. It's not linear at all. Like it takes really hard troughs, times of no productivity whatsoever. So I think when a lot of people look at their jobs and they say, oh, well, but I could do this same amount of stuff. Well, but that's not what innovation cycles look like. And if you look at some of the more innovative companies on the face of the planet right now, they definitely have at least a solid hybrid. So the issue you've had is there's a difference between what CEOs think of as hybrid and what employees think of hybrid. And CEOs think of hybrid as, hey, you're in the office 3-4 days a week. You have some flexibility. You can be home 1 or 2 days a week. Employees largely think of hybrid being like, hey, I can come into the office when I feel like it. And that turns out to be a couple days a month. Then
Yeah.
that literally, if you look at the data, Christian, like that's what the data actually
Yeah.
is. What we see is this transitionary time where people are like, no, you need to be in the office more regularly. We're saying that's 3 days a week. We're saying that's 4 days a week. And that's really backlash because the employee interpretation of it is come in whenever you want. And then they come in. And so we actually did a survey across all of the companies we manage. And what we found was that of meetings taking place in meeting rooms, like the conference room I'm in right now, 50% of them are one person sitting in the meeting room. They're doing exactly what you just said. They're coming in. They're on calls to Europe. They're on Zoom. They're on calls with other people in their company that aren't in their office right now. That obviously isn't a good experience. Why would you travel to the office to do it? You wouldn't travel to the office to do it. And that's why people are rethinking what hybrid looks like. They're rethinking what the workday needs to look like. And then they're also rethinking what the office needs to look like to support that.
One of the things I look as an example, there's a company here in the mountain states called Kiln.
Mhm.
That is, and then I know that we work is kind of like there's a lot of them that are out there in different regional players,
Yep.
and so like Kiln is in Utah, Colorado, Arizona. I think they may have expanded.
Right.
But for a couple of years, I had what's called a hot desk at it.
Right.
So I would pay a monthly fee to have access. There was like shared printer, and you pay a little bit like per page and things if you want to print things.
Yeah.
But you had this one beautiful office space, like really meticulously
Yeah.
designed. But that I could have clients come and meet me, and I'm sitting at a desk with 8 other people. That's this long desk that I plug in with headphones, getting stuff done and people doing things around me. There's offices, there's cubicles, there's tables all around. There's smaller companies that it's cost less than renting, a building for themselves. They've got some pods, some areas that are dedicated for them in this space. But what's nice is I would have partners, clients, I have meetings. You talk about like meeting rooms. There are formal meeting rooms, which I could schedule, get in on there. There were informal spaces everywhere, nooks and crannies. There were pods which had like no closed door but a 3 walls and an open doorway there, so sound. So again, informal. If it's open, go over there. Hey, let's sit down here for 3 people, have that conversation. Spaces like that. I loved that idea. Like for me, for my small business, being around other people and that energy and talking to people, just like you pointed out. But I love when companies have started to look at that model
Right.
in their office space to say, do we need to have people in closed offices? Do we need to have cubicles? Should we do it more where there's not a dedicated space for you, but your team has this space? and people come in, sit at other tables when you're working on that, meeting rooms that are dedicated for that.
Yeah.
That's another way of looking at hybrid. I'm still a fan of the I don't need to be in the office every day, but I get that
So
it
think
needs
about it.
it
If
needs to be
you're
set up.
Right. So first of all, why'd you go to a kiln? You went to a kiln because you liked working with other people, even though they weren't at the same company. So when you think about the challenges most people have going to the office today is they go in and they're alone often, or no one else in their team, or everyone they work with is remotely. So even though there are other people around, there is not a lot of work that's happening at the same time, not a lot of synchronous work that's happening at the same time. So first thing, before we get to office design and everything else, the first thing you have to do is make sure synchronous work is happening when people are in the office, because otherwise, why'd I bother coming in?
Right.
The second is to exactly your point. If I'm doing my heads down work at home, why am I going to an office that has been designed for heads down work? It makes no sense whatsoever, right? Like it should be designed around that collaboration. It should be designed to bringing people together or work where there are conference rooms or client meetings or whatever it might be, work that I have to do in person, not designed for the pre-pandemic, which is, hey, I just need a quiet place to go and do my spreadsheet or my developer work or whatever it might be. And this is the problem. The pandemic ended. The pandemic started. We all went remote. And then people said, all right, I want you back in the office. I'm throwing the doors back open again. Come back to the pre pandemic office. Is it surprising that we have friction there? It's not
Yeah.
surprising at all. We're going back to an office that was designed for an era that doesn't exist anymore. And this is the transition that you see. This is why I said we're in this transitory state. This is the transition we see the workplace going through right now.
I think back to like, but before I joined the phone company, I was working for another consulting company, and I had it was a 4 day in the office,
Yep.
and so 1 day remote, and they kind of spread us out. There was 1 day, I think it was Tuesday, might have been Monday, where everybody had to be in the office. So of course, people the people that've been there the longest cherry picked and said, "Well, I'm going to be, my day off will be on Friday." So it's 4 day, 4 tens days, but
Mhm.
1 day was not an option because that's when we had our group meetings.
Right.
And what I found is I ended up being the new person. I had like Wednesday, like it was a bad thing. It was fantastic having Wednesday off, being able to go to the bank or go see a movie, and there's nobody in there, go grocery shopping on that day.
Right.
But now it's a slightly different model. I've been working remote since for the last 15 years.
Mhm.
You know, went from in the office every day. Funny enough, for 10 years, worked at companies building collaboration technology to allow anybody work from anywhere. And yet all those companies had no work from home policies.
Right. Great,
You know,
crazy.
but how are we going to learn to know to use our technology
Yeah.
to provide the
Right.
feedback?
Yeah.
But with all of that, you still have to have that organization. Like in that example, it was EDS that I worked for.
Yeah.
What are the days where we're all together? There's no ifs, ands, or buts because this is when we do the
Yeah.
team meetings. We do these formal things. But it was nice to have that day where I could carve off, like, look, I'm work from home on this day,
Yeah.
and then I would find things, tasks to complete where I just needed solitude, quiet, work on that, get that deliverable done, and it worked out that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most people, I mean, this is the beauty of hybrid work, right? So if you look at most of the academic studies on the subject, they actually very routinely and consistently say that about half the time in the office is the right amount of time. So 2 to 3 days a week. So the work from home zealots aren't quite right. That they can work from home all the time. That actually does not provide all the benefits that everyone hopes it would be. At the same time, the in the office 5 days a week zealots are not the right ones either. That somewhere in the middle is really, it depends on the organization, depends on teams. There's a whole bunch of caveats to it all. But once again, the academic that's really kind of taken all the passion, everything else out of this, really resoundingly sits on 2 to 3 days a week in the office is the right mix for the very reason you just described. Like your experience is kind of spot on for what the reality of the situation is out there.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. I've heard people ask this. It's like, hey, if we're all remote, why do we still need to have an office?
Right.
And you've kind of discussed that. I mean, you still need to have that shared space. It's difficult to create and sustain a culture as an organization grows if you're never face to face. It's even when I was, remote, like I was constantly flying.
Right.
The home office with that remote was with the company that Seattle got acquired by a company in Boston. So I flew, yeah, not drove. I
It's a
drove
long
once.
drive. It's a
I
long
did.
commute.
I
Right?
did once. I drove the once, and I'm good. I can say I've gone coast to coast. Uh, but yeah, but I made regular visits, sometimes a couple times in a month,
Mhm.
depending on what was going on,
Yeah.
because I needed to have that face to face. Like I just was not getting the entire picture on the phone or in a
Yeah.
video chat.
Yep.
But so looking at what makes a workplace, so the physical space attractive and functional for employees today. So we've got these ideas of like what we need. Like what are the kind of the core components on a high functioning office?
Yeah. So it's designed. I've seen the quote before, right? You don't design a church for Tuesdays, right? Yeah, you design it for the days it's going to be used. And I think once again, if we looked at the office space of the past, it was designed for a 5-day work week. It wasn't designed for that 2 or 3 day work week. You brought up this idea of everyone having to be in the office. We're seeing a lot of that. So we're seeing a lot of these are the 2 team days on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, you have to be in the office, and then you pick the other day that works in your schedule, and those are the 3 days a week in your office. We're definitely seeing a lot of that. We'll see if that's what sticks kind of long term, but we're seeing that emerge as a best practice, or these 4 days a week in the office, or whatever it might be. So then designing the office around that collaboration that we just discussed, because if you're sitting there coming in, being by yourself. So once again, we looked at everyone in because we can see live usage of the office across our large customer base, and we can see that 20% of the people come in and sit by themselves. So once again, why am I coming to an office and sitting by myself? I might as well just be at home doing that work. So designing a workplace around how people are actually using that, and that really can depend on teams, but you touched on some of them. So we see a lot of people giving up office space. We see a lot of people moving to more hotel desks, as you described. A lot of people thinking about conference rooms a lot more too. So one of the things that we've lost during the pandemic, and people don't realize this, is that we've lost our ability to have conversations in front of other people. So it used to be like you're on the floor, as you described, you had your headset on, you're having calls, you're doing all of that in front of a bunch of other people. We're so used after 5 years of doing that at home that now people go and do that in phone booths and everything. So we see a lot more phone booths installed. That common area that you talked about, how to create common areas, and then food, this whole idea of food and commonality around food. Like we see the best workplaces do a really good job of leveraging food, cultural events, team days, that sort of stuff to getting people gathering. Those are really the big things that we see. That's on one side working, but also tough for workplace managers to really manage well, is because they'll say that their job is changing from managing office to really they're kind of a concierge. They're culture creators now, things that before they did that didn't exist. That's really their job title now, to satisfy the exact need that we just talked about. I mean, the surveys point this out too, right? I mean, I just saw some recent data. 20% of people would rather take a 5% pay cut than be recalled back into the office full time.
Yeah.
There was another one. It was 1/3 of people would rather have a work action, like go on strike, than get called back to the office 5 days a week. I mean, this is a really divisive topic, right?
Yeah. It No, it really is. I mean, I see there's a lot of talk about on, TV and radio and podcasts, around exactly that. And it's hey, look, and I understand a lot of that. It's one of the reasons why, I'm, remained independent and just didn't go search for another corporate job I'm, my costs are lower. My income stayed about the same, thankfully, but it's, the benefits of being able to go where I need to go. And but even when I do work with the client, like there's almost always an in-person component to that. Either I'm
Right.
flying out there or I'm already at an event where they're going to be, so we're able to get together and meet. Like there still has to be that interaction.
So I'll give you a good example. I was talking to one of our customers. It's a rather like mid-sized investment firm, a few hundred folks, and They had all offices, all assigned seats before because they have a 5-day week back in the office policy.
Mhm.
And what they're finding though is when they're in the office, it just felt kind of dead. It's sort of that idea of I go to a restaurant and it feels like nobody else is in there. The energy is low. I'm not getting all the benefits that I talked about before of sitting close to people that are high performing, that the discipline, the energy, and everything associated with it. So what they're finding was because they spend 2 to 3 weeks a month on the road visiting clients, just as you just described. So they went to a situation where they cut their office space by about half. They went to a pure hotel desk situation. And now they're like, it's amazing. When I go into the office, it's actually vibrant. It's full of energy. It feels like the office should. It's so different. They didn't change their policy at all. All they did was change their footprint size and how they're managing that footprint they had. And the vibrancy went through the roof. And now people much rather go into that office rather than being like, why am I bothering going in? I might just well work from home this day if I'm not going to see anyone. It's having that right capacity to your need is really important. And we see companies going through that, by the way. So we do a survey every year of how people think about return to office. Last year, 75% of people said they planned on reducing the amount of office space they have in the coming year. This year, it was 46%. So we saw a very significant decrease in the number of people that we're starting to see that bottom in office space, and people have right-sized their office for the amount of people that are coming in and what their work looks like.
Yeah, I see a lot of large companies. I mean, very very close. I'm very aware of the movements of Microsoft to see like them shutting down. If you know, like Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington, well, they had properties, space in downtown Bellevue, multiple buildings, very expensive real estate, as well as down in Seattle. And they've started to like they're not renewing things, they're shutting things down, they're consolidating. But with that comes a redesign of the spaces that are remaining.
Yep.
And so they still are very much, I believe so, like a very much hybrid. But again, a lot of the teams have flexibility to say, hey, we've got more individual contributor activities going on, and most of the people we're talking with are home. And so maybe in office 1 or 2 days a week, and other teams that are saying, hey, we've got to be 4 days a week with one flex day to work from home, and here's what we're going to go and do. But again, that's a team or business unit by business unit being able to go and make those decisions. But it makes you think about, what else can you do from a cultural standpoint to make the office a place where people want to go again? Like we talked
Right.
about the food aspect of it.
So food, let me talk to you one about coffee. Coffee, here's a good one. So good coffee. I was down at a customer of ours in New York. They have 6, 8 floors, I forget, in a large building. And they have really, really, really good coffee on one floor because they wanted to attract people. This is an organization that's doing very deep research, super innovative. And they wanted a place where for these scientists and researchers and stuff and all these different floors to be able to come, but we have to have them on different floors. So they have this really special coffee on one floor, and there will be a line of 20 people long on that one floor getting the coffee. It's something they can't get at home. And also, then they meet somebody who's doing research in some other area. They have that conversation while they're in line, and they did that by design. Like that was on purpose. And we see a lot of those things. Is what can I get at home? Technology is an important one. Clearly, we play in the world of office technology, but tech is a really important one. What kind of screens can I get? What kind of access to equipment can I get? What kind of things can't I get at home that I can get in the office? Obviously, access to people is a really important one, but there's a whole bunch of stuff around that really helps tip the scale. So yeah, I can have a very productive day in the office versus now, if you're to talk to most employees, they'd say, oh, I'm less productive in the office than if I were just to stay at home.
Well,
Whether
that's
that's true or not is a different question.
well, yeah, right. There's that, and in how you're defining productivity. I mean, that's something that leadership should discuss. It should be part of your reviews of one-on-ones and discussions with managers around how you're using that time. But I think again, that's why I go on the side of flexibility to say that you should have those conversations. Different roles, it makes more sense. I mean, there's some like obviously if you're in the manufacturing sector and there's like the front office, be back in the warehouse, there is no work from home. You were out of work while pandemic was going on. To go back in where you're working with your hands and those kinds of things. So we're largely talking about information workers.
Yeah, what percentage? Do you know what percentage that is? By the way, what percentage of jobs can actually be done remotely?
Uh, uh, I have no idea.
Yeah, of all jobs, about a third, about a third,
Oh,
about 2/3. So this is definitely there's a privileged percentage of people where the jobs can be done remotely. And the one thing we haven't talked about, by the way, is the effect AI is having on that. Did you see the jobs report from today
I
on
did not.
hiring?
Oh no.
Yeah, so IT unemployment rate was I forget mid threes, high threes, I believe, in December,
Hmm.
and it went up to the high fives in January. And largely, people think the impact that AI is starting to have on IT jobs is largely the impact people think because
Yeah, there's a lagging, indicator there of like what happens with the roles and retraining and stuff for those. I'm still very optimistic of where it'll go, but you're right. I mean, I think a lot the way a lot of well, it's like with the downturn in the market. A lot of people that laid off and like a couple times in during down times in the market, I've lost my job and twice the same company realized their mistake like 2 3 months later and tried to bring me back, and one time went back and did it as a contractor making more money. So it's like, why did you do this, but I think that there's that same, I think there's going to be a mistake made at some roles, companies that I think are overly optimistic. I know this is a different topic. I
yeah,
talk a lot about this, but
changing nature of work, though. I think what is underneath everything you just said is how work is changing and changing in fundamental ways that didn't change before. So largely administrative, repetitive tasks. Some of the various things that are easier done at home in some ways, like just developing code, like just jamming through code. AI agents do that now.
yeah,
So therefore, I don't. If I'm a developer, how to like it's whiteboarding with other team members, figuring out how we're solving the next big problem becomes more important than I'm spending 3 days just kind of jamming through a bunch of code because I can write that in 10 seconds now using using Copilot or something like that, right?
yeah.
So very different world that we're entering. That's I guess that's more of my point is as we're
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
about
No,
long term
no,
future of
no,
work.
I get it too. And so again, looking at the existing organizations, I mean, it does put a lot of pressure then on people to go and think up and be creative of, well, what else can I do? What new service offerings? What can I go and do?
Right,
And so there will be, I think hardship drives a lot of innovation.
right.
Down market, it's like the best time to go and to start focusing on a startup that you're not, like my first software startup, I was out trying to raise funds right before the dot-com bubble burst.
Mhm.
And we realized it became very difficult suddenly to raise funding, money to get people interested in what we were doing.
And so you weren't able to raise before it burst then.
We did some seed and things, but no, we weren't. We were going after VCs bigger dollars to go do what we want. No, we were lucky in that
Yeah.
just prior to the burst, but we were approached about buying the company and we ended up selling. But then we, personal story. Then we sold our house in California towards the top. It went up a little bit after we sold for just under about 9 months, and then it fell.
Mhm.
And yeah, so we were lucky there.
Your
Um,
timing was good then on both things and
yeah,
selling the company before the bubble burst. So that's good.
so yeah, so it was a bit like that, but again, getting back into this, I mean, with those changes, you're right, companies need to adjust and be looking at, what the type of work that we're doing. You're not in business, like whatever you do today,
Mhm.
um, you need to constantly optimize and adjust to where the market demands are going, what the people and the skills that you're able to pull in to and to employ to do what you can to stay in business and to continue to grow and drive value. And so, yeah, there's some fundamental shifts in a lot of what that looks like. Do we need to go hire a lot of these administrative folks? No, even on the junior level, like the low code, no code, but building automation, a lot of those things where over the last 5 years, there's been huge growth in hiring of those kinds of roles.
Right.
And there's going to be less of a need for that. All those people need to be looking at what else can I do? Where do I fit? Where can I add additional value?
Right. And what that looks like and where am I, right? So once again, if someone's remote, in remote from whether it be from so I'm here in Boston and someone's in New York or Salt Lake City, wherever that might be. If I'm paying sort of high cost US wages, why am I doing that when maybe I could go to a lower cost place and
Yeah.
hire, right? So I think that's the other thing that we're, by the way, we definitely see if you look at this latest round of layoffs that have happened over the past 6 months or so, there's a lot more undercurrent of certainly people thinking about where jobs are done.
Yeah.
So, especially if I'm going to have remote employees, why don't I just really lean into remote employees and go to a low cost place to have remote employees? And we're definitely seeing that wave of reckoning. We're getting off the office topic now, but
I
back to
know.
like,
We're getting people really concerned here. So
yeah,
let's make it enticing for the office. So go back to like that question. But seriously, for an organization, so post pandemic, policies are you're bringing people back to the office. You've got kind of the different percentages of employees that are enthusiastic, less enthusiastic, hostile against. How is office design itself evolving to encourage people to come together and to encourage innovation?
right. So two things I say. So first of all, you talk about enthusiastic, not enthusiastic. Clearly, I fall into the enthusiastic camp, especially really, really enthusiastic for a hybrid schedule. People are making those different choices. I definitely believe deeply that people are better off in general with in-person time, and but we could go through all of that. So the two things are removing the friction from the office experience. That definitely is a big one. So when you think about all those friction points to get into the office. So something that we do here at Robin personally is we looked at commuter benefits. So if you look at why people don't come into the office, it's commute time is number one, right? People don't want to spend the commute time. There's the whole thing around some flexibility, but you can counter that with some flexible days, right? That you can work around with schedules. Commute costs is a huge one. And we looked at it and we said, all right, like we had a commuter program before. Many companies had commuter benefits before the pandemic. And then, but a commuter benefit really is a 5 day a week commuter pass or parking pass or something like that. It doesn't make sense in a hybrid world. Like the economics don't make sense for employees. You wouldn't buy a subway pass if you're coming to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week because
Right.
you'd never get your money back from it.
Yeah.
So we actually flipped to a daily commuter benefit. And that daily commuter benefit is great. So what we did was we flipped to a commuter benefit that was we pay it's based on zones how far away, but the furthest zone away from the city, it's $50 a day. And we looked as we did a survey of what it costs people to come into the office. We cap it at 2 days a week because we have a policy where we expect people to be in the office 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And so $50 a day for that daily commuter benefit. And we saw a 40% increase in the number of people coming into the office when we did that. So what we did was we said, all right, what are the reasons why people aren't coming to the office? Let's start addressing them. Some of them actually have to do with office design. So we definitely think deeply about that. But some of them just have to do with the other policies around office usage. And that's why it really pays for people to think about this holistically. If you think about it one-dimensionally, you're probably not going to get it right. We thought about hiring deeply. So once again, we looked at the managers were often saying, all right, well, Micah, you told me just get the best talent anywhere I get it. So I'm going to hire it wherever that is. And now we're saying, no, like we actually really want those people to be in we have two main offices. We want them to be one of our two main offices because we want them to collaborate. We want them to be closer together with other people. We'll always have a percentage of our workforce as remote, but what we saw was that was sort of heading the wrong direction. And we needed to have some policies to make it clear where we want people to work. And I think a lot of companies haven't gone through all of that reconciliation.
Yeah. Well, it's gonna take time, and as things continue to change. I mean, nobody wants to go through another pandemic experience. I don't think it would, even if there was, an actual another second pandemic. I don't think we would do a lot of the things that we did this last time around, where it was relatively different. But when you have pandemics 100 years apart, it's kind of difficult to do planning.
Right.
The
Exactly.
in-office work was a little bit different 100 years ago.
Mhm.
Spanish flu era. But
Very different during the Spanish flu epidemic. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah. But it's interesting to look at. I don't know how many of your clients are they really looking at like the analytics around it, like you guys are. I mean,
Yeah, they deeply look at analytics. If we look at So for our primary buyer, who typically sits in IT or workplace teams, usually this intersection of facilities, IT, and HR, because they're thinking about the technology stack around the office. Their challenge is people complying in making people's lives easier and complying with whatever the workplace policy is. So that's often the biggest challenge. So if it's 2 days a week, how do I help employees? Management's wondering what's happening. Nobody wants to be looking over everyone's shoulder, but how do we make people sure people are living the culture, that the expectation that we have? And that's why when you asked about this transitionary period, we're definitely in that transitionary period still,
Yeah.
as we well know, right? That there's all sorts of mandates out there. Compliance with them is uneven, definitely across companies. And I think what we'll find is my hope is that we'll come to some sort of even ground, which we talked about before. And we'll certainly have some companies that are in 5 days a week, but I think most will end up in that 3 days a week, something else zone. But that's what people are struggling with out, right? The moving from static office space to flexible office space is really, really challenging for organizations. And we talked about policies being one of them. Certainly for us, we think technology stack is a really, really important one, that where you have friction, I mean, little details keep people from using the office, from I don't know who else is coming in, is my team coming in that day, to where am I going to sit, to food, what food options are there going to be, what kind of coffee, I mean, you name
Yeah.
it, all this stuff is actually friction to using the workplace. So trying to remove all of that friction. And then finally, the design, right, is I didn't go into the office to sit in a phone booth all day long. Why didn't I just do that from home? It was the very thing you brought up at the beginning of the call. So it's office design can help solve that, but also you got to change how people think about the office. So here what we do is Tuesday's team day. So we have a team day, and in-person meetings happen on Tuesdays. So whatever you're doing before, let's look at our schedules, and especially a lot of companies begin the year, they kind of go through like meeting revamp, let's do meeting audits and everything.
Hmm.
Let's look at the schedule. So rather than just going into Tuesday, if Tuesday is your team day, and having the same meetings you ever always had, let's look at what are the in-person meetings. Let's move them to Tuesday. So that way on Fridays, I'm doing my remote meetings. I'm not doing remote meetings on Tuesday when I'm in the office. And it takes really intentionality. I think that's the problem, is most organizations haven't been intentional about adopting flexible work.
Yeah.
They've just sort of said, hey, come back and be hybrid. And nobody knows what that actually looks like. And the experience has been really poor, which is what's making people less likely to want to do it anymore.
Yeah. What do you think, 5, 10 years out, what does the workplace look like? I mean, do you see any trends that you think are going to pick up, that it's going to be dramatically different from this? Like, what does the office look like in 2030?
Office is someplace you want to be. So the office is, rather than someplace I have to be, the office is someplace I want to be. And I'll give you an example. I used the restaurant example before, but I'll use the music industry before, right? So the music industry went through this massive transformation over the past 2 decades, let's say, right? They made all of their money off of CDs. Album sales are where they made all of their money. Live events were a way to promote the selling of CDs.
Hmm.
Then what happened, right? Streaming music came about. Basically, you're able to get the content for almost free. They made very little money off of streaming. So what they have to do, they had to adapt that concerts, the live performances is where they made all of their money. It's where they make the bulk of their money, and some merchandise.
Merch.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
live events is where they make most of their money. So what they have to do, they had to make the live events much more enticing. The live events had to be someplace where you're willing to pay $500, $1,000, whatever tickets are nowadays, maybe more if you're going to the Eras tour or something like that,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yep.
whatever it might be. So they had to make those live events very enticing. And when you think about that, what we've gone through with the office is, it used to just be a given that you went to the office 5 days a week, and that's just what the expectation was. And now technology and culture have changed such that we said, no, actually, I can be remote and be productive, but there has to be a reason for you to want to get in the office. And what
Yeah.
we see is the best companies are doing that already. So that's why I can look out 5 or 10 years and say that with certainty. We see the best organizations are doing that people don't feel like they're being forced into the office. They're like, hey, it makes me better. I'm better professionally because I'm going in. I have a good experience. I get access to stuff that I can't get access. I get good food, good coffee, good technology. I get access to all those things that I can't get access to anyplace else. And I think what we'll see is we're in that transitory period, transition period that you talked about before, but we'll get there longer term.
So what kind of a final question here? So what's one piece of key piece of advice that you have for companies that are trying to make the office an irresistible destination?
Look at the data. Look at the data. There's so many thoughts and feelings. I got to tell you, we could have five other people on this podcast, and everyone have a different perspective. There's so many thoughts and feelings. Look at the data. The data like points in the right direction. Analytics are a real thing. If you don't have a good data source right now, find a good data source. The data will tell you what's working and what's not working. You got to take a data driven approach to it. Most organizations aren't still. It's all thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, it's funny. You should have a plan before you embark on a plan. Wow.
Amazing,
Look at
right?
the data, make a decision. No, I mean, that's actually been over the last decade, it's been a real rise of organizations realizing we need to make data-based decisions around this. So product company or services, you're looking at that as a collaboration guy. We're constantly looking at level of engagement and things and all that data to understand, hey, why is this working with one team? It's not working with the another team. What do we need to do as far as training, re-education on that, or is it just different because the focus is different? And what do we learn from that? And so all of that, constantly looking at the data, is so critical. But
Yeah.
yeah, this is an exciting space. I'm interested to see where things go, because one thing with AI is, and I keep saying this, is that we can't predict what the changes will be. If you
Yeah.
think of like your productivity tools like Word and Excel and things like that, they're going to be working very differently in 5-10 years
Yeah.
because of the way that AI does things. So maybe we'll be all voice controls over everything, and the keyboard will kind of go away from a lot of those, that the daily activities. I mean, who knows what this is going to look like?
Yeah, I think it's the best way because the rise of AI agents, and not to get too deep into this topic, the rise of AI agents is a real thing, and the way most knowledge workers should think about it, this is the paradigm I use, is that you're going to be now a supervisor, and a supervisor, a number of AI agents that are doing the actual work for you, and like companies like ours, we're already moving this direction, right? So that even if you're a single contributor employee, you are now supervising agents. So your job looks more like a supervisory job than it does I'm doing all of the core work all of the time. And I think that's in the nearer term, that's where we're definitely heading with AI. Longer term, to your point, I don't know exactly
Yeah.
what it all looks like, but I think that's what, as we're seeing agents really take on workload, being able to be self-directed. And the way that we kind of describe them around here is it's sort of like an intern or a new employee. They work well, but they have to be told what to do. They have to be trained how to do it. You have to work through all of those pieces. You have to know what they do well and what they don't do well, and that's a supervisory component. So I
Yeah.
think that's the piece that we can really look forward to, is that everyone gets to be supervisor soon, but you're going to have AI agents who are doing the work, and that's what you're going to be supervising.
As the AI agents become aware of their own limitations and aware of what other agents do, and then can call on others, it's going to be doing more and more complex activities. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the stuff that's like we're waiting for now with new capabilities. So it's not just going in for search. It's searching for something in a browser and not getting the result, like no results found. Like that would happen. It's like it didn't have it, and it would tell you, it's like, I don't have this database. I know this other agent that has that database. I'm going to go there, and would just do all that and provide then that answer for you. Very
Right.
simplistic way that kind of works, but
Yeah,
that's what's
exactly.
coming.
Yeah. That's what's coming, and a lot more.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time. Of course, folks that want to find out more about Robin, if you go to robinpower.com, of course, I'll have the links in the blog post and on YouTube as well. So really appreciate your time today, and good luck on your endeavors. We'll have to have you back in a year or so and see what's changed dramatically from this, because I do think with this shift back into, so much in the office, like something's going to happen. It's like it's going to be something that's newsworthy out there, I just feel like there's going to be something to talk about in a year around the
Just
space.
look at the headlines, right? I don't think a year ago we thought that 5 days a week everyone would be saying that the federal government would be back 5 days a week. So I'm sure a year from now we'll have a whole bunch of changes that are
That's right.
happening.
We're gonna attach Doge to this to look at this problem.
Exactly right.
So hey, well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Micah.
Thanks, Christian. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the CollabTalk podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.